Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of Startup Sales. Really excited for today's guest, Richard Smith of Refract.ai. Refract.ai, for those that don't know, is actually a really cool tool that has AI listening to your phone calls and analyzing your calls and helping you, teams of small sizes like early stage startups to enterprise teams, in analyzing your calls and seeing where your weaknesses are, where you can improve. It's really cool. So with all that knowledge that he has and all these calls that he has access to and sees, today we're going to be speaking about the discovery call, the importance of the discovery call, how to do better discovery calls, and all the tips and tricks around that. So it's going to be a really great episode. Let's get to it.
Startup Sales is a podcast about what it's really like to get a business off the ground. We talk with founders, CEOs, and sales VPs from the high-tech market. You'll learn how to build and scale a sales team. You'll also hear about the growth challenges and tough decisions from others who have had both successes and failures. And now, your host of the Startup Sales Podcast, Adam Springer.
Richard, thanks for joining us.
A pleasure to be here, Adam. Thanks for inviting me on your show. Looking forward to the chat.
Yeah, me too. This is one of the things that I stress so much with people is that it's not about selling. It's about asking the right questions. That's it. It's that easy. So I'm really looking forward to hearing your thoughts on this and diving into, how to do a better discovery call. But before we do that, can you tell people a little bit more about you and what your experience is?
Yeah, sure. So Richard Smith, I'm the co-founder, and I also head up the sales team here at Refract.ai. Been in sales about 13, 14 years now. Really have performed all roles within the sales team from SDR, booking meetings, through to doing small deals over the phone, doing larger enterprise deals face-to-face. Now, responsible for building and growing and running and coaching tech sales team here at Refract. So we're quite an ironic position, really, with what we do. We sell a product all about helping to analyze and improve sales conversations to sales leaders. So really, there is no hiding place for me and my sales team with what we do. We have to be really good at and effective at how we sell, because that's really crucial to what our product's all about. I spend a lot of time speaking with sales leaders, sales trainers, sales coaches, all who are striving to improve the effectiveness of their teams. And ultimately, when you think about sales effectiveness, really everything kind of buckles down to one key thing, and it's the conversation. You have better conversations with prospects, you have better results. The best salespeople are the ones who understand how to have more effective conversations. Refract really is a technology that we've created to help companies unlock the kind of the black box of what goes on in the conversations that their sellers are having with their customers, understand what top performers are doing differently, being able to take people from average to good and good to great, it's like learned since we've been doing this 6 years into the journey, and learned a hell of a lot personally about sales and what good looks like in sales along the way, and still learning every day myself too.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that it's a never ending game. It's always trying to catch up and learn the new things. So let's just jump right into it then. And most new salespeople or founders that are getting into and starting to sell their product, they do exactly that. They try to sell the product. They try to do a demo and say, hey, look how cool this is. Why do you think they shouldn't do that or shouldn't focus on that?
I think, first of all, it's the easy thing to do. It's easy just to talk about your product. And for a lot of founders, oftentimes, more times than not, for B2B tech companies, the founders are the people who've built the first version of the product. They're not sales is not something that they have a lot of experience in. They're not that comfortable doing. But what they are very comfortable about, and what they're often very passionate about, is the thing that they've built, is the product. Interestingly, this morning I do Monday morning sales stand-ups with my sales team, and what we've started doing is actually inviting customers to do like a 10-15 minute slot in the stand-up. And so this is really relevant because this literally happened this morning. Brought on a customer, and the idea behind this is so the sales team can learn about why the prospect bought from Refract. Like, what were they doing beforehand? What was the ultimate reason why they bought? And how are they getting value from our product moving forward? And when I asked the customer, when one of my team members asked the customer, so what was it about Refract that made you want to buy? Interestingly, the next few things that came out of his mouth, not one of those things was a feature related to the product. And what he actually said was, well, it was actually in the sales process, you guys made me think about problems that I wasn't really aware that I had. And beforehand, I thought the way I was doing things beforehand was fine and okay. And actually what you did is you made me realize how much time that was making, how much time I was losing doing it the way I was doing it before. I was realizing how much more productive I could make the sales team as a result, and what that would mean in pounds and pence or dollars and cents. And not one thing he mentioned was, oh, I really like this feature. I love this cool search functionality. I love these reports. And I actually said to him, I made that point, and he said, you're right. Like, obviously all that stuff is important ultimately, because it's key to your evaluation. But the true motivating factor someone has to buying your product is nothing to do with your actual features and benefits. It's about them understanding how are you going to help solve their problems and help them. How are you going to help make their life better than it is today? And coming back to the actual question you asked, is if you just as a founder spend all of your time just talking about your features and all the things that you find really cool and brilliant in your product, and your prospects, they're never going to learn about, okay, so what? Like, how is that going to help me? And how is that different to your 3 or 4 competitors that you typically go up against? Because let's face it, like, especially in the SaaS world, most products are sort of 80 to 90% similar in functionality these days. It's a very crowded marketplace. You can no longer rely on your product just to do all the selling. You've got to learn how to understand people's motivations for buying, and oftentimes it's not because of the fancy dashboards and integrations and features that you're showing off.
Yeah, it's so true, and it's so amazing to hear that, because all the time people want to just like, wow, it's so exciting, look what we have. So I'm glad. That's really cool also that you have each week you bring on one of your clients. I want to dive into that real quick. I know it's a little off topic, but do you get somebody that just recently signed up, or is it somebody that's like an old time customer?
We try and do a mix and a blend, really. And I think that the key reason why I do it, and this is where I think a lot of people in sales or people who don't have a lot of sales experience, one of the biggest mistakes they make is that sellers talk about their products and the challenges they solve in their own words typically, and oftentimes those words lack context and don't mean anything to the people they sell to.
Yeah.
And so one of the things that I recommend anybody doing, even if you're an early stage founder and you have early adopters on your product, is interview your customers and record the interviews and listen to the specific words that they used to describe the problem that they were facing before you came along. Because I guarantee the way that they describe that problem is very different to how you describe that problem in your marketing messaging or in your sales pitches. And this is why it's so crucial, why I've brought customers on, is because I want the salespeople to listen to how are our customers describing their world. What are the specific language they're using? And oftentimes they're not using fancy jargon, AI this.
Best in class service.
Yeah, exactly. These fancy buzzwords. They're using... in fact, today, as an example, Adam, I said to the sales team after the client went off the call, I said, he could go to like his grandfather, this guy, described the problems he had, and his grandfather would probably understand the problems because he talks about it in such simplistic language. And sometimes I think what I took from that is sometimes we try and overcomplicate the messaging in sales, and often that's why hearing your customers say it is so much more powerful than you just having that in your head.
Absolutely. And going back a little bit, like having them explain their pain rather than you telling how much features you have and all of your functionality is like you said, like, okay, so what? Like, that sounds cool. Like, okay, you record and analyze my phone calls. Like, okay, so what? But unless I realize that I have a problem and it's not just causing me sales, it's also causing me time. It's causing me headache. It's causing us to have higher churn in our employees and lower morale. All of these things, it's just a lot bigger than just, hey, let's improve your sales.
Right.
And you don't know that until you actually speak to your customers.
Right. And crucial to that is being able to ask great questions, which I'm sure we're going to get into, because I think this is where people often go wrong, is that they tend to find themselves talking too much about their product, but not enough time learning about the world of their customer. And that's why discovery is so key.
So let's talk about a discovery call. First of all, if you had to define what a discovery call is, what is a discovery call, and what would you say is like the best kind of format for that?
The way I equate discovery is essentially information gathering. You know, you're learning. So, and the purpose of the discovery is to achieve two key objectives. Objective number one: does this customer have a compelling problem that exists in their world that you can help solve? That's key. When I say the word compelling, what I mean by that, it's not like a small problem. It's a decent sized problem that they are compelled. That is impacting their life to an extent they are aware of it, or then, after the discovery, they're aware of it and they're not happy with it. Yeah. The second reason,
that you could solve.
Yeah, exactly. Like, if you can't solve that problem, then you shouldn't be talking to them. But to your point, that's interesting, because I think some people end up talking with prospects about problems that they know they can't solve, and they get led down that path by the prospect, and that's why, again,
I have a client like that right now.
Yeah, exactly. And sometimes you just stay in your swim lane. You know the problems you help solve, and find people who've got those problems. The second purpose of a discovery call is, once you've found a problem, compelling problem, is this customer motivated to solve that problem? And that's often the bit that people miss out. People come off a call, and I still have it now with my sales team. Say, they've got this problem. They're losing sales. They're losing. Their conversion rates aren't where they need them to be. They're about to miss quota this year. Okay, that's great. I mean, they sound like problems. And I asked them, so do they want to solve it? Do they want to fix that? Oh, I think so. You think so? And this is because for some people, a problem that we perceive to be a problem, for them, they might say, you know what? That is a problem, but guess what? We're doing all right in other areas. I'm not that motivated to solve that right now. And it's kind of, I use the example. Problem that I had with my car radio is, like, in my old car, my car radio station could only get like 2 radio stations, and it was radio stations like, it's like classical FM was one, and there was like another radio station of, like, I don't know, like music that I just don't listen to. The reality is that was a problem. The reality was I wasn't compelled to change it because I don't actually listen to the radio that much. And, the drives that I do are relatively short. So, like, that's key. And you've got to find prospects who not only tell you, not only identify it's a compelling reason, but they tell you that they're motivated to solve it. And when you get prospects who you get more prospects saying, I've got a compelling reason to buy and I'm motivated to solve it. That's when you start to have much more success in sales, and your sales cycles get shorter and you spend more time with the right prospects. But ultimately, that's the key objective of discovery. Identify compelling reasons to buy and understand how motivated people are to solve those problems.
Absolutely. I add a third step in there as well, typically. Is
Yep.
Exactly like you said. Those are the two pillars, but there's something in between. Rub salt in the wound.
Yeah.
Once you find that pain, make it hurt.
I think that's a really crucial point, because I think like sometimes one of the biggest mistakes I see people make in discovery is exactly what you've kind of indicate there, Adam, is they hear the prospect say, so I'll give it in the world of Refract as if I'm selling to a VP of sales. Ask them a question and say, also, talk to me about the performance of your sales team. They say, oh, it's mixed. Now, for some people, they might hear that and think, sounds like the customer's not that happy, but it's mixed. He's got some good, some bad. But that isn't often enough to get the prospect to reveal how big of a problem that actually is. And the reality is then you have to go that kind of peel back the layers. You've got to go down into what I describe as level 1, level 2, level 3, level 4, where it's like, okay, so talk me through the disparity then. What is the difference between one of your top reps and someone who's in the middle? Oh, it's quite big. It's quite a big gap there. You see, big gap, like how much are we talking? Oh, well, top rep does like 200% more than the middle rep. Okay, when you said percent, can you quantify that in like dollars or pounds? Yeah, I mean, you're talking a $500,000 difference. Okay. And then suddenly you've gone from someone saying they've got a mixed ability in their team to suddenly you're talking about you're putting a value on that problem. And again, that's like when you see the best salespeople can get to that level where they get prospects to open up and start to quantify the side of the problem versus those who hear the surface pain, as I describe it, and just move on to their next question.
Yeah. Yeah. And then you could even go further and like, okay, you've got $500,000 per rep. Now you've got 8 top performing reps, and then you've got 20 low performing reps. Wow, that's a lot of money.
Right. Exactly. Exactly. And that's where you get prospects.
20 times $500,000. Wow.
Yeah. And you can say, so it sounds like you've got a X $1 million problem then. Yeah. How motivated are you to solve that?
Yeah.
Pretty motivated. Okay. Like, that's when that's when you know that you're spending time with the right prospects.
Yeah. And when you get to that level as well, negotiation becomes little to none when it gets to that stage.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Because you quantify what you do in the discovery process, which is so key, is you're essentially quantifying value for the prospect. So that, I think a lot of people, especially early stage founders, who might not have a lot of confidence in their pricing model, may underprice what they do. May feel nervous selling a price to a customer. You start to feel less nervous and have less anxieties about pricing when you start quantifying the size of the problem that the prospects have, and you can only do that if you do good discovery. Otherwise, you're always at risk of somewhat you don't quantify that. You tell them the price, and people say, "Oh, wasn't expecting that's quite high." But if they've already told you that they've got a problem that's this big, then when you quote them something that costs them 10% of that problem, you can stand by that amount with full confidence. And if they don't see the value in that, well, you can't make people see the value. But I think you naturally become more confident in how you price and what you price when you can start to quantify value of problems with prospects.
And I think this has to do with like a fundamental change as well. Is we're no longer, when you take this approach, you're no longer selling. You don't have to sell your features. You don't have to sell your product. You're now just asking them questions about what problems they have. And hey, we could solve that, or no, we can't solve that.
Yeah.
It makes it really easy.
Right. I love that as well. Like what you've just said there. Is here we can solve it, or here we can't solve it. Like, here's another pitfall of discovery that I see people make is people will do the same. We'll put people through discovery, but we'll have the same outcome every single time. As in, hey, we just had a discovery call. Let's go to the next step of me showing you the product. Well, no, actually, what you should find is that far less prospects should see your product than see your product, because you're going to have less people will need your stuff than will need your stuff. That's just a fact of life in anything in sales. You need to understand that discovery is identifying those people who you can't help as much as people that you can help, which is, I think, you make a valuable point there. And if you find that every discovery conversation you have is you leading to a demo or some next steps, there's something going wrong there, because not every prospect you speak to will buy your stuff and needs to buy your stuff, and you can't help everybody. And one of the biggest killers for so many in sales is they deal with massively inflated pipelines. Look, I've got 100 opportunities in my pipeline. It's like, but 75% of those are just stuck at no decision. The reason they're at no decision is because they should have never have qualified. Got to this stage. Exactly.
There's no opportunity.
There's no compelling reason. What's the compelling reason for this person? I don't really know. Well, they're never going to buy.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's really, really valuable point you made there, is find people who you can help and also people who you can't help.
Yeah. I try my best to disqualify more than qualify. And if I could disqualify them, that I feel good. It means I did my job right.
Right. Yeah. There's something quite therapeutic about telling some prospects no. I quite enjoy doing it, and I say this to people in my team all the time: is the worst answer in sales is maybe. You want to get yeses and you want to get nos. You don't want to be stuck in the maybe zone, as I describe it, because maybes rarely ever come to anything.
And you waste all your time chasing them.
Exactly.
So besides pushing deals through that shouldn't be, what are some of the common mistakes that you've seen typically during discovery calls?
Well, there's a number here, and obviously we have the benefit of, like, we analyze all these calls, and so I hear the good, the bad, and the ugly all the time. But also I need to preface this by saying that doing good discovery is actually really hard. Like, what we're talking about here, Adam, is, in my opinion, the most important part of the sales process. Because it's got such a high level of importance, it naturally comes with a level of complexity. The most important things are never the easy things. And anyway, so if I was to look at some of the common mistakes, I think for a really easy one, I think anybody can fix, is setting that, like, really solid agenda and upfront agreement at the start of the conversation. Because what I sometimes see salespeople doing is they start the call and there is no there's no sort of level of expectation from the outset about what happens at the end of the conversation. The prospect almost feels like they're going into this almost like blind conversation, and they spend half an hour on the call thinking, what's going to happen at the end? Are they going to ask for my credit card details, or and as a result, they feel at ease, and they feel not at ease. They feel uneasy, and when people feel uneasy, they're less likely to give you the answers that you're looking for.
Yeah.
So one of the easiest things that anybody listening to this can do on your next call is say, "Hey, Adam, appreciate your time. From my perspective, what we're hoping to achieve today was establish whether we can even help you or not. I don't know if we can yet. If we do, if we get to the end of the conversation, we find out we can help you, then typically this is what happens next. If we get to the end of the call and we figure out we can't help you, if I think I can't help you, I'll tell you no. Are you comfortable also telling me no if you don't think this makes sense?" You get the prospect to agree with you on, like, there's going to be no maybes at the end of this conversation, but also they understand that this is what happens in the sales process. This is what happens next. And that next could be a demo of the product or a deeper dive of the product, or it could be bringing in a
more
colleague.
Discovery calls.
Exactly. When you do that, you're straight away in control. And that kind of leads me to a second mistake: is people on discovery calls, they lose control. If you lose control of the sales process, you often lose control of the deal. Of the deal is what I see so often. And you want to feel in complete control of that conversation. You want to almost assert yourself to say, okay, this is the purpose of the conversation today, and I'm going to be asking you questions. You're not going to be asking me questions just yet. You can do at the end, but I want to be learning the stuff that I need to learn to help me move this opportunity forward. Some salespeople, and this often happens when you start talking about your product and features and benefits in your discovery calls, is prospects will drag you into the weeds. Oh, so how does it do that? And can you integrate with this? And do you have this report? And what about that functionality? And before you know it, the salesperson's fighting fires in the call. They're dealing with all these questions. They're like, oh God, this stuff isn't even that important. And it's because they've lost control and because they're not in control of the questions. So, the second key mistake there is, don't relinquish control. Make sure you're asking questions. Asking questions dictates control and flow. And as soon as you start talking about things like your product, then you're just going to get pulled into the weeds by your prospect.
What are some good questions then to ask during the discovery call? Because it's easy for us to say here and like, okay, this is how a discovery call should go. You should learn about their pain. But it's so hard, as you said, if you're not experienced, it's so hard to come up with the right questions and good questions to be asking.
Yeah, and this is probably one of the most common questions I get asked about. People are like, oh, Rich, like, have you got any great questions I can ask on my discovery call? And the answer I give back is actually some of the most effective questions you can ask in discovery are the simplest questions. I think people kind of spend like ages almost trying to like write down these fancy questions that ultimately just end prospects in like yes traps. And what I mean by that is they end up writing questions which end up becoming quite misleading for the prospect, when actually the best questions are just really simple ones. And an example of that is, hey Adam, you mentioned you've got a sales team there of 5 reps. Can you tell me more about what it is that they're tasked to do? What is it they're targeted on? Okay. You mentioned there that they're targeted on 100,000 a quarter. Tell me a little bit more about how are they performing against that. You say, oh, they're doing okay. You say they're doing okay. Can you expand on that a little bit? What does okay mean? And all I'm doing there is I'm asking, just basically, it buckles down to, can you tell me a bit more? Can you explain a little bit more? Can you expand on that? And when you just get prospects to talk more, they often give you the answers without you having to think of these really fancy questions.
Yeah.
So one of my favorite questions is, can you tell me a little bit more about that?
Yeah. And then shut up.
Yeah.
That's a big key, is when you ask these questions, don't ramble on.
So true. Because on that point, I often hear people say, Adam, can you tell me a little bit more about that? And they start answering the question for the prospect. Do you mean this? Do you mean that? You don't need to do that. Yeah. So often when you say, tell me more about that, the prospect will go again. They will go again and will give you more information. It's amazing how often this happens. Yeah. And I think salespeople feel like they need to, the question they've asked, sometimes they think in their head, oh, that's just too much of a simplistic question to ask. Like the prospect's going to think I'm stupid for asking the question. They don't. They ask them questions like, tell me more. Can you expand on that? They will give you more. Believe me. The other, just to maybe like, I created this like little framework that people might find useful if you're struggling to ask those questions that kind of quantify the pain. I think is where people struggle with, is kind of getting to that level. I call it like level 4. And I create this framework called the 3 Ps. This is really easy. Well, in theory, it's a good framework for people to maybe think about and apply their own world in it. And it's plot, pain, possibility. When I say plot, a plot relates to a story. Like every story has a plot, right? So, and the best way to think about this is talk about a prospect that you've helped with a similar problem. So it would sound like this. So the plot would be, oh, hey, Adam, yeah. I mean, you mentioned there that you're really frustrated with closing ratios right now in the team. You're just doing lots of demos, but none of those are they're not converting to deals. What you've just shared there, Adam, is really similar to to John from Acme I was speaking to last week. He shared the exact same issue. He said, Rich, we're doing lots of demos, we're creating lots of opportunities, but the close ratio isn't where it needs to be. And we actually figured out that it was actually because the sales team were just spending too much time talking about the product and not actually asking great questions. Does that sound familiar? Yeah, it does, Rich. Okay, so there's your plot. You've just used a similar customer story. It's relatable. The next thing is the pain. The pain question was something like, so, when you say the close ratios aren't where they need to be, can you give me a feeling as to how far off you are? How far away are you from where you want to be? And you start to quantify how big the issue is. But then prospects don't want to just exist in pain all the time, in my opinion. They also want to feel like there's a better place. And
that's light at the end of the tunnel.
Exactly. And that's where the possibility comes into play. Say, okay, so let's imagine, Adam, 6 months from now, you manage to improve the conversion ratios from X point to X point. Might not be the biggest difference, but in 6 months, if you could achieve that, what would that mean for you personally? And notice I've used the word personally there. I want to hear from Adam, like, what that would mean for him, because people are intrinsically motivated personally.
Yeah.
And they would say, well, if it did that, I mean, things would look like they go in the right direction. It would definitely fill me with confidence about my standing in the business. My boss would obviously be happy. And people just think about things that are important to them. So if you're struggling with thinking for questions, think of that little framework, plot, pain, possibility, and you can do that 2 or 3 times in every single conversation, discovery call, just based on other, maybe if you solve 2 or 3 problems for a prospect, you just use that framework 2 or 3 times and you'll tend to find things, it practice, and it will start to become much more easier for you.
I love it. I think it's such a good framework. And one of the things that's fantastic is how you end it, is how will this affect you personally? If we solve this tomorrow or in 6 months, how will this affect you personally? Because people forget that we're selling or we're talking to a human on the other line. We may be a B2B company, but we are speaking and helping a human who has a job to do, who has frustrations when they go home at night and things like that.
Yeah. I remember one of my colleagues, I remember listening to one of his calls actually, and he actually asked that question. And the prospect said something like, well, I've been shooting for a promotion to have a more global role. And I think this would, if I achieve that result, it would help me get there. And he the next question was, all right, so what would that mean for you? Oh, well, pay rise, bonus, like all the things that he clearly important to him. And again, people are just, as humans, again, we are intrinsically motivated emotionally and by our own personal motivations, not necessarily by the motivations of our company. So that's why that question, what would it mean for you personally, can work so powerfully. Yeah.
I think this is all really important, and I like that you have a framework rather than like a script. Like, here's a list of questions that you ask. And I always tell people, no matter what, even if you're really nervous, it's your first call, take any notes that you have and turn it away. It's better just to be yourself, listen, and have a real conversation, and only get 5% of what you actually wanted to cover in it than to actually go down the list and just check off the boxes.
That's such a powerful piece of advice, in my opinion. Like, you're going to be more authentic just being yourself and having a conversation than, being like a checklist of questions that sound canned. So I think that's a massively powerful piece of advice you should share there.
Yeah, thank you. Great. So, Rich, there's so much here, and I think we could talk for another like 2, 3, 4 hours and still only scratch the surface.
Right.
But how can people reach out to you and learn more about Refract.ai?
Yeah. So, obviously, contact me on email, richard@refract.ai. Equally, I'm pretty active on LinkedIn, so if you search for Richard Smith Refract, you'll definitely find me. I post a lot of content daily, really, about things to do with like conversation tips and tricks and stuff that people might find useful. So if you've found some of the stuff I've shared to be valuable and relevant today, then you could maybe find some more stuff that I post every day, and happy to connect and with anybody on there that wants to. But if you want to find out more about the company, best place is our website, www.refract.ai. And I think if anybody is listening to this is motivated to want to improve the outcomes they have, not just in their team's conversations, but in their own personal sales conversations, then you might be with you checking out what we're doing.
Great. Rich, I really appreciate it. One last final question. If you had one piece of advice for all the salespeople and founders listening, what would it be?
This might sound a plug for Refract, but actually you can do this without tools like Refract. But record and listen back to your sales calls and the demos that you're having. You will learn so much about yourself by doing that activity. You'll hear stuff that you didn't hear the first time around. You'll be able to hear how much you're talking versus the prospect. You'll be able to, identify parts of your conversation that were most interesting and compelling for your prospect. And you'll also just become better at sales by doing it, because you'll identify your bad habits and the things you could have done differently next time. It's like any professional in the world, you look in sports, they're always watching back and listening back, reflecting back on what they did, because that's the route to success is self-reflection and ultimately practice. But do that, and you will, without having even a coach, you will be able to get better at what you do just by doing that valuable activity.
I think that's a golden piece of advice. This is one of the first questions I ask my clients. Are you recording your calls?
Yeah.
So very much. Rich, thanks very much for joining us.
Loved it. Cheers, Adam.
Thanks for listening to Startup Sales with Adam Springer. Subscribe to the podcast so you never miss an episode. Contact Adam about speaking engagements or consulting services at adam@startupsales.io.